Hi, Brittany. I'm good. I'm good. Happy International Women's Day.
I feel so fortunate to be partnered with such an amazing, brilliant, awesome Syrian woman.
Well, thank you. The honor is all mine, okay, to be partnered with you.
I was doing some research about International Women's Day, and there's so many origin points, which is great, right?
Mhm.
But it just, especially now, it feels important to honor all of the facets and the experience that make us us. And being a woman is definitely one of them. Um, I remember being young and I just could not wait to grow up and just be a woman. And I don't know, I was just always surrounded by so many awesome, powerful women.
Mm.
That's all I wanted to be. So,
Yeah, I mean, I didn't want to grow up. I know that for sure.
yeah.
I was very happy to be cared for by the wonderful women around me.
Yes. I mean, adulthood is vastly overrated for sure.
Yeah, exactly. Totally would like to go back. Um, in my younger capacity, not as an older person that turns younger, as you become a senior. But no, I mean, I think it's important to acknowledge, the people that, especially when you're younger, maybe you realize that they were inspirations at the time. Maybe you didn't. I mean, I think there's definitely um, people I think back to now that helped shape me, but I didn't look at it that way at the time. But it was important to see these different people that were like me as women, Black women in particular, that I could see myself in, and in some ways model some aspects of myself after them.
Yeah.
It's important to be seen in that way. It's also important to acknowledge um, those people that help shape you, so they know that they feel good. I think that people don't realize, in particular, Black women don't get celebrated and praised as often as maybe some other groups, but whether they do or they don't, it's always good to know that you made an impact on somebody.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And sharing that is free, right? It
Yeah.
doesn't cost anything to share that impact. So,
Yeah. Yeah. So, um, first, I would want to acknowledge a couple people. So let me acknowledge, like, my mom, for example. Like,
mm, yes.
obviously, she was around my entire life, right? And
Yeah.
I was talking to someone last night, and I was like, I'm so much like my mother in many ways that I don't recognize until I do certain things.
Mhm.
And usually the things that surface for me at the time, I felt like they were annoying, and then I do them, and I realize that the reason I'm doing them is because I care, right? And
Mm.
so that's where it surfaced from. And so I should have grace with that. But she also has been, like, just a very strong, um, forward thinking figure. And she always sees opportunity. She does her research. And even despite getting older, she wants to keep her brain young, right? So she
Yeah.
leans into those things that, keep her mind very active, and that she can be a contributor, ongoing contributor to the family. There's a lot of things I don't think that, I would have done without my parents, obviously, but both of my parents, but without my mother, who, she, in her career, um, is an immigrant. Both of my parents are immigrants from Jamaica.
Mhm.
And I think one of her first jobs was in banking. She didn't want to be a teller because she felt like that was going to be a stagnant position. So she actually refused the job as teller, even though she was in this country without work, right?
Yeah.
And they called her back, like, I think the next day to give her more of a client facing role. And she stayed in banking and she elevated even after leaving her role, parenting me, and then going back to become like one of the biggest wealth managers on Wall Street, you know? And
Wow.
so I saw that growth and her ability to do both things, right? Which I think just, I don't know if I think about that every single day, but it's just because it's part of what I've seen, but it just
Yeah.
makes all things possible.
I love that. Love it.
Yeah.
Karen's mom, we love and appreciate you.
Yeah.
Thank you for thank you for bringing her here. And I would love to similarly extend that to my mother and my grandmothers,
Mm.
both of whom were phenomenally progressive and I would say important in child rearing space. So my mom actually went back to school when we were young. So I've experienced her as a stay-at-home mom. I've
Mhm.
experienced her as a working mom. And in both, it really cemented that sense of purpose because whatever she did, she was going to do it really well.
Yeah.
And there were moments where, I'd come home, she'd be there, there'd be snacks, and, everything was so well run that
Mhm.
I took it for granted.
Yeah, of course.
And with her going back to work and seeing how, in retrospect, of course, from a child's eyes, as soon as
Mhm.
she got home from work, my sister and I were rushing to tell her everything that happened with our day and what we were doing. And then, of course, my dad's there and he's, sharing with her. And now, having worked a whole day, when I come home, all I want is silence.
Mhm.
And so thinking about how she had these two kids who were, looking to be centered, a husband also looking to be centered, and trying to create that time for herself. I'm just like, I have no idea how you did it. My grandmothers both were in the medical field. Both of them had 7 children. So I don't even know how. Both my parents are the youngest of the 7, and for them, both from different communities, both having different backgrounds, um, but getting to know them as women, not just in their role. You are a mother and therefore you take care of me. You are my grandmother and therefore you take care of me.
Yeah.
But later in life, my mother's mother, I got to know her just having conversations, and she had the whole life I didn't know about. I didn't
Mm.
know she was the first Black model for um, a department store in the
Oh
Southeast, which
yeah.
is called Belts, and so that was really interesting for her to be positioned in that role and what that meant. And she'd spent time in New York, and there were just, I never knew that. I
Yeah.
just knew that she would make these really great seafood boils every time we went down to North Carolina. But seeing how she advocated for herself, for her children, um, she was very well known for standing up for herself. And, at one point, when a man thought it'd be a good decision to call her outside of her name, she
Oh.
chased him down with a rifle.
Mm.
But just in all spaces commanding respect. She also had, mixed race origin, and because of how she appeared,
Mhm.
being, I would say, commercialized or having people, pay her to touch her hair and just objectified in some of the worst ways,
Yeah.
and fighting to create a family despite everything that said that she couldn't. So
Yeah. I think one of like that's amazing, right? And when this is the callback to our ancestors, right? That we need to make on a regular basis. And I think we need this to become more a part of our community because even what you said about learning who our relatives are as individual people, learning who our grandmother was as a woman, who our mother is as a woman, not just as the person that took care of me. That's such an important distinction that we don't really take time to do. I think one of my biggest regrets is my grandmother, she passed. So I didn't know my other grandparents. My father's side, they died very early on, and so did my grandfather on the other side. So my grandmother was really the one grandparent that I knew
Sure.
for a period of time. And she ended up having dementia. And so I really never got a chance to like ask her about her life, right? I get bits and pieces from people like my mother, actually, my mother and my aunt, get bits and pieces. And, she's credited actually with our family's ability to come over to America. Even my dad's side is credited with that, right? Like she helped facilitate that. And she came over. She was married. She had 2 children, but she left. She came over and got a job on her own as a CNA, I believe, or I don't know if she was a true CNA when she first started. And, you know, that's pretty huge. And I've learned about like some other people in like other older people in my family, like one of, I guess, my great aunt was like the first nurse in the area where she lived, and like all of those things. And those things are lost because we no longer have like a strong oral history within our culture. And it's something I think that's really important that kind of ties us back, to who
Absolutely.
we are. Like, we don't call on our ancestors. Doesn't mean that you can't still have the religion that you practice, right?
Right.
You can have that and other
Correct.
spiritual tools that keep you connected.
Correct. I
We're not
mean,
talking.
yeah, I will say in the moments when I've thought about questioning my worth or felt insecure, I remember where I came from and, that my grandmother in the Jim Crow South was not going to be condescended to. She was not going to be disrespected. She was not going to have
Mhm.
people cause harm to her or her children. And in a time when that could have meant life or death,
Yeah.
that was my reminder like, no, okay, I can do the thing.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
She was willing to quite literally put her life on the line for her values. I can do it in similar or much better circumstances.
That's so true.
And to your point about these passing down, right? These stories, these oral histories that we have, it just reaffirms how important words are.
Yeah.
Words matter, words mean things, words communicate a history, a legacy, a worth, and an identity.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we're now in a time where I think everyone agrees that words mean things, but it seems like we're dealing in a space where those words are more polarizing than ever. And people are taking opposite views of what to do with these words.
Well, I think you're putting it nicely. Because we have an administration that is trying to erase many of these words that help people identify themselves, right? The New York Times actually shared a list. The
I
article
love a
for reference,
listicle.
yeah, is these words are disappearing in the new Trump administration. And it's a long list of words, but like let me just start with one of the main ones where we've been talking about. If we were
Okay.
to have this same conversation and not use the word women, which is on this
Okay.
list, okay, and not use the word Black, which is on this list, right?
Hmm.
We couldn't talk about ourselves.
Hmm. And this list, thank you for sending it over. So agencies have to limit or avoid these words. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm gonna share some that stuck out to me, and I'd love
Yep.
if you did the same. So I see accessible,
Hmm.
belong, clean energy, polarization, pollution, sense of belonging, trauma, victim. I'll just pause there. I'm jumping over a
Yeah.
bunch, but
Mm.
yeah, those are just some, and I bring those up because as we've talked about, whenever people think of DEI, they immediately go to race and gender. So
Right.
I purposely skipped over anything that could have been perceived as race or gender.
Right.
Um, but yeah, what sticks out to you?
Um, Another one that sticks out to me is mental health.
Mm.
Um, and political, because that word is used all the time. um, and what also sticks out to me is what's not on the list, which is
Okay.
men, and which is also white. So there's Black on here, there's Latinx, there's
I don't see Asian on here.
indigenous community. You're right. So Asian's okay. So white and Asian is okay. And men are okay.
Hmm.
So it's okay for us to talk about those groups, but it's not okay to talk about the other groups. That is what sticks out to me as well.
Identity, the word itself, is also
Yeah.
flagged.
Yeah. There's so many words on here. Just in the context of this conversation, the fact that women is on there and men is not,
Right.
it actually kind of blows my mind. Like,
Mm.
what are we, and the word, and gender is on here too, right?
Correct.
So gender-based violence, gender diversity, gender identity, ideology, gender affirming care, which we know is very controversial in this administration, and gender. So we're not supposed to talk about gender at all, and not specifically women.
Correct.
But
Or
which is a-
sex, or
or
sexual
sex,
preferences.
right? Because LGBTQ and LGBT is on here as well. But when we see some of the examples that they call out from websites that have been changed, LGB is okay.
Mm.
So I think one thing we can kind of say, kind of in a blanket way, is that I don't know that these words have been completely thought out in terms of the context of everything, right?
Sure.
So, and they do say limit or avoid. It's not a ban. I don't think you can ban words. But you could try, but I don't think you can. But what happens when you eliminate some of these words from in the context of the administration, right? What happens when you remove some of these words? How does that affect certain departments or policy, right? My big question is, okay, on the census, are you even doing that anymore? Because you can't use these words.
Great question. And if you are a federal organization giving federal funds to NGOs, nonprofits, how do you address a harm toward underserved communities if you can't talk about it, or underrepresented communities, which can be men,
Yes. Yes.
right? I mean, females, feminism, multicultural, climate crisis,
All of
community
these things
equity.
to that point
Yeah,
doesn't affect one group. I mean, the
right,
point has always been that certain groups are more harmed by the same situations. It doesn't say that the other groups are not harmed. Like all
correct,
groups are harmed by, say, climate change, right?
correct,
Some groups are harmed more by climate change, right? And in any business, and you would try to solve any problem, let's just say any problem, right? Like you're assessing the risk factors for how you solve the problem. And the problem is usually so big that you have to start to narrow your focus. So you need to understand deeper data to figure out where to start and where to end, right?
correct,
And in this situation, you might want to say, hey, let me focus on where something is doing more harm and mitigate that first and step it back. Or you could say, let me focus on where it's doing less harm, learn from that so that I can improve something where it's doing more harm. I mean, there's different ways to look at it, but you need to understand and unpack the underlying factors supporting that, right? But how do you do it if you don't have the language
and the
to do that,
context.
the context to do that?
You don't.
And what does it say the rest of the world? It's like, let's stop acknowledging that women exist.
There
To your
are
point about the
some.
nonprofits, like if they're focused on women, because that's what they're doing, what does that mean? They no longer get funding because they're focused on women and I don't understand. I guess I'm rambling. I don't understand.
I will say that the United Nations acknowledged International Women's Day for the first time publicly in 1977. After
Yeah.
that, there are committees, whole committees, that are committed to
Yeah.
addressing the challenges that women face across the world together. The United States has enjoyed a particular status, another banned word, right? For some time as being part of the first world and having taken particular approaches toward women and posturing themselves, right? The country's postured itself as this having the moral high ground when it came to providing opportunity, support, and freedom for women, because we are a country that ostensibly focuses on freedom. This seems like anything but. And the question that I posed many episodes ago, what is the harm? What's in a word? If what clearly we're moving toward, if this group is truly superior, what is the harm in other groups identifying themselves, showing up for themselves? What is the harm? That is something that I just can't understand. We, at this point, I believe, have more girls right now that are being born than men. We have, I believe it's around 55% of the country is women. Are we now to erase them?
Yeah. The answer is yeah.
Where,
I think,
where do they go? Where should we be right now, Karen?
well, I think that part of the perceived issue is that, okay, America has enjoyed different forms of free labor for free or low cost labor, right? For a very long time. What's not always acknowledged is part of that free labor is women.
Yes.
So our marriage rates are generally lower now, right? Because part of what we were tied to in terms of our future well-being was being married and, having access to resources and ways to support our livelihood. And I can't remember what year it is, but I think it's similar around the 1970s, right? Women could open up their bank accounts for the first time,
Correct.
things of that nature. So that independence started happening just basically 50 years ago, right? And so with women being at home, taking care of the children, providing that free labor, it allowed men to go and elevate their stature and build and do the things that, they wanted to do. And they were only competing with other men in that regard. Now that women have surpassed that original mandate, that competition is raising in many different ways. They're no longer home to support the males, so less males are rising up in the same way that they did before. They still, depending on who you are,
Sure.
rise. And it's just kind of turned things upside down for that particular group. And that could be viewed as a perceived threat to their own success and existence.
Mm.
And so if women return to the home and some of these traditional values, that opens up more opportunity for them. Less opportunity for us in terms of that growth, but definitely more opportunity for them. And maybe that's the long view. I don't know. I'm just riffing right now, but I want to just acknowledge that women have, again, for a very, very long time, not been valued for the work that they performed in the home that allowed a lot of, America's, reputation and notoriety and growth to happen. It's just,
Right.
we've just been cast aside.
Hmm.
That's one view.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely one view. And I agree with you. I think about the conversations that are kind of being had in the zeitgeist about the male loneliness epidemic.
Yeah.
And it doesn't seem, which, by this mandate, the government wouldn't even be able to solve because it's a mental health situation,
That's true.
right? However, what we're seeing is a very blatant demonstration of coercive power. Right? If we cannot center ourselves, and we will force the exclusion, and exclude is another one of the banned words. We will force the exclusion of everyone who is not like us, and that is a choice, given that we are positioned. We have made friends around the world, right? We've again also imposed ourselves around the world.
Mm-hmm.
And how do we do that when there are women who are leading countries?
Yeah.
Right? We can't speak to humanitarian causes, to human rights violations, when we very may well be creating some right now.
Well, yes, but what we have seen is just not the acknowledgement of those facts. So it's not like, even if we do it, it's not like we're going to talk about it and act accordingly. Like, oh no, we have ethics, right?
Right.
Ethics
Right.
seems to be off the table at this point of view, which is actually, I think, one of the most frustrating things for me. It's like no one's being held truly accountable for their actions or missteps or, whatever that's happening in the world today. And it's just like, what is maddening is that a list like this could exist at all in
Yes.
today's society, and that it is unchecked, right? Like, where is, and maybe I missed it, so please holla at me and let me know, where is the pushback, right, on what this means, like what the implications are of not using these words? Like, again, like what policies is it going to affect? How does this trickle out to corporations, right? Like, how I just, there's just so many things that feel very open ended, and now it's just really this broad case for everything, which we know doesn't work. Like, it just, you can say you want put word here for all, right? And that's cool. It should be that way. But it doesn't acknowledge how you get there. What are the barriers to getting there? You have to acknowledge the pain points dead on. And most of this has to do with people and how people are treated. I was having a conversation with ChatGPT the other day.
Okay.
And I was asking it, like, how do you get rid of bias in people?
Okay.
And we had a very long, extensive conversation. And then the short version is, too long to read, you can't. And that's what ChatGPT said. You just can't, because people come with their own, perceived, beliefs. And you could take mitigating steps, but it will never erase it. It will always be there. And that's why you have to acknowledge it so that you can address it, or at least attempt to try to address it. If you try to erase it, it just sits below the surface and just manifests itself in different ways. And I thought that was, like, again, I'm giving you the paraphrase version, but like, that was very insightful. It's like, and I'm like, are you sure? Okay. Be creative. Okay. Like, yeah, actually, and I get it. Sometimes it hallucinates, but it felt very, it was giving me like examples of why and all of this. So I just don't know how this list exists. And I'm fearful that, we can't have conversations like this and talk about ourselves, openly. Of course, you and I can sit on the phone and chat about our experiences, but one of the things we like to do is share them with the world. And so it feels like there's a push to limit that.
Which is unfortunate, because I find these conversations deeply valuable, as do our listeners.
Yeah.
It seems like what's going on is a phrase that tends to be overused in the startup world, which is, we'll build the plane as we fly it.
Mhm.
And I don't think there's an acknowledgement of what's lost and how it impacts the people on the land, right? If we're building the plane when we fly it, we're throwing things out without considering what happens. And even though listeners may be screaming, that's the point, right? That is, these people in power, this is what they want to do. I would posit there are unintended effects that even they have not yet considered.
It's not safe. Safety is a real issue. I mean, in startup land, they're usually building software that's technically not going to kill somebody tomorrow. But when the government's doing things like this and, they have millions upon millions of lives around the world in its hands, there's an extra level of caution that needs to be paired with ingenuity that it doesn't seem as if they're taking based on the fallout. But I guess there's more to be seen. Things change every single day. But I think we as women have to fight for our identity. Oh, all of us have to fight for our identity, but we as women in particular, we're half the population, no matter what the other parts of us are made up of. And we need to assert that authority.
Agreed.
So happy Women's History Month and International Women's Day.
Yes, same to you. We will continue to honor women.
Absolutely. Well, until the next time.
Bye.
Bye.